The sun beat down on the turquoise waters of Antigua, glinting off the hull of the Sea Eagle, a 112-foot yacht that served as a floating throne for Sir Alan Stanford. In 2008, Stanford was the king of the Caribbean, a fifth-generation Texan with a booming laugh and a knight's title. He moved through the world with the untouchable swagger of a man who had conquered finance. He arrived at cricket matches in a black helicopter, landing on the pitch to unveil chests overflowing with $20 million in cash. To the world, he was a billionaire visionary. To his 30,000 investors, he was a safe harbor in a stormy global economy. Beneath the crystal waves of the mahogany desks that Stanford International Bank, a $7 billion abyss, was widening. The cracks first appeared in the shadow of the 2008 financial crisis. As the titan of Wall Street, Bernie Madoff, fell, a panic of chills swept through the financial world. Investors, suddenly wary of the guaranteed returns, began knocking on Stanford's door, asking for their money. They were told their funds were tucked away in conservative liquid assets. In reality, their savings had been siphoned into a sprawling web of failing businesses, Caribbean real estate, and Stanford's own pocket. In early 2009, the SEC and FBI began closing in. The suspense reached a fever pitch in February. While his empire crumbled, Stanford tried to flee. He attempted to charter a private jet to Antigua, but the company, sensing the impending doom, refused his credit card. The billionaire was suddenly a man without a country, a fugitive in his own land. On February the 17th, the SEC formally charged him with a massive ongoing fraud. The manhunt ended not on a tropical island, but in a modest driveway in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Federal agents surrounded the man who once commanded fleets of planes and yachts. The billionaire pirate was now just a prisoner. The drama didn't end with his arrest. While awaiting trial, Stanford was brutally beaten by a fellow inmate in a Houston jail. An assault so severe it left him with extensive retrograde amnesia. He claimed he couldn't even remember his own name, let alone the $7 billion disappearance. But the prosecution's star witness, former CFO James Davis, remembered everything. He testified to decades of cooking the books, describing how they had inflated property values by 5,000% to keep the illusion alive. In 2012, the gavel finally fell. Stanford, once a titan of industry, sat hollow-eyed as a judge sentenced him to 110 years in federal prison. The yachts were sold, the knighthood revoked, and the billions mostly gone. Today, he resides in a high-security cell in Florida, a permanent resident of the wreckage he created, while thousands of victims continue to pick through the debris of a dream that was always just a lie. The hunt for Alan Stanford's stolen billions was never a sprint. It was a grueling, decades-long siege against a fortress of offshore accounts and high-priced legal teams. When the SEC finally padlocked Stanford's doors in 2009, the vault wasn't just empty, it was a crater. Of the $7 billion promised to investors, the liquidators found a pittance of cash. The rest had evaporated into Sir Alan's vanity projects, cricket tournaments, a private airline, and a string of failing Caribbean real estate ventures. For the victims, the early years of recovery were a second trauma. While Bernie Madoff's victims were shielded by SIPC insurance, Stanford's investors were left in the cold. By 2013, the court-appointed receiver, Ralph Janvey, began mailing the first checks. The amounts were insulting. Retirees who had lost their entire life savings opened envelopes to find $2.83. After 4 years of legal maneuvering, the recovery team had managed to distribute only $55 million, less than a penny on every dollar lost. Meanwhile, the legal and administrative costs had already surged past $120 million. It felt less like a recovery and more like a final looting. The tide began to turn when the legal strategy shifted from selling off Stanford's used furniture to attacking the giants that had enabled him. The receiver and an official Stanford Investors Committee personnel set their sights on the global banks that had processed Stanford's fraudulent certificates of deposit. It was a high-stakes gamble that took over a decade to pay off. The banks, including HSBC, Toronto Dominion Bank, and Societe Generale, fought tooth and nail, denying any knowledge of the Ponzi scheme. But as the cases approached trial in 2023, the walls finally broke. By late 2024 throughout 2025, the total recovery reached a staggering $2.5 billion. While this represents a monumental legal victory, recovering nearly 35 to 40 cents on a dollar, the victory is bittersweet. For many of the 18,000 claimants, the money has arrived too late. Many original investors passed away during the 15-year legal battle, leaving their heirs to collect the remnants of a stolen legacy. The billionaire pirate may be rotting in a Florida cell, but the true cost of his $7 billion lie is measured not in the money recovered, but in the 15 years of life, stress, and dignity he stole from those who trusted him. In the world of global finance, a bank is supposed to be a fortress. But for Alan Stanford, the world's most powerful financial institutions weren't walls, they were plumbing. They were silent, high-capacity pipes that allowed $7 billion to flow through the pockets from unsuspecting retirees into a Caribbean abyss. The thrill of the hunt for the billionaire pirate eventually turned into a cold, clinical war against the giants who stood by while the ship sank. If the Stanford Ponzi scheme was a machine, TD Bank was its engine. For nearly 20 years, TD served as the primary correspondent bank for Stanford International Bank. Every time an investor in Houston or Caracas bought a fraudulent certificate of deposit, the money likely pulsed through the TD Bank's accounts in Canada. The suspense of the courtroom centered on a single question. How could they not know? Internal documents reveal that as early as the 1990s, some TD employees were uncomfortable. They saw billions moving in, back and forth, transactions that had no clear investment purpose. Yet, the relationship continued. Prosecutors argued that TD provided the aura of legacy Stanford needed to an investor. Seeing a major North American bank handling the cash made the offshore Sir Alan Stanford look like a safe bet. In 2023, facing a trial that could have cost billions, TD blinked, agreeing to a massive $1.205 billion settlement. While TD handled the volume, HSBC and Societe Generale provided the reach. HSBC was accused of ignoring the glaring red flags of money laundering. They processed the international transfer that fueled Stanford's lavish lifestyle, the jets, the yachts, and the $100,000 bribes to Antiguan regulators. Societe Generale was caught in the crosshairs for its role in managing the offshore accounts, while the proceeds of the crime were packed. The drama peaked in early 2023 on what lawyers called the courthouse steps. Just as a jury was about to hear how these banks allegedly looked the other way, the settlements came in fast and furious. The monumental recovery was the result of a 15-year legal siege that finally breached the bank's defenses. The banks never admitted to knowing about the fraud. Their defense was always the same. We were just a bank. We followed instructions. But the $1.6 billion they collectively paid suggests that a terrifying reality of modern finance. A Ponzi scheme of this magnitude cannot survive in a vacuum. It requires the infrastructure of the global banking system to breathe. The settlements were a victory, but a hollow one. The banks paid with their reserves. The victims paid with their lives.